The Russian Revolution was a time in global history when the working people felt that they were entitled to political power that they never had before. The ideas that started the Russian Revolution, that wealth should be distributed and shared equally among citizens of a nation, can be seen in modern political movements.
The Russian Revolution was, I think, one of the most important events of the 20th century, one of the defining events of the 20th century. Of course, it started out as a local event. It started out with women demonstrating in Petrograd with bread riots or bread demonstrations. It then spread, and I do believe that the Bolsheviks made a difference because they attached to the revolution a kind of a global dimension, a call for a universal uprising, an abolition of injustice worldwide.
About 100 years before the Russian Revolution, most people in the world were farmers. And in Russia, perhaps 85 or 90% of the people lived in the countryside, in small villages or on large estates. Most of these people did not own land. They were not allowed to own land. They had to work for the people who owned the land. They were called serfs. It was just very much like a slavery.
In 1900, just 39 years since the abolishment of serfdom, 4/5 of the Russians were peasants, and only 1/5 could read or write. At the turn of the 19th century, Russia was a large country stretching 5,000 miles from the German border to the Pacific Ocean. The Russian Empire covered 1/6 of the Earth's land and spread across 2 continents, Europe and Asia. In 1900, Russia had a population of 130 million. Less than half were Russian. Others were Finns, Poles, Armenians, Ukrainians, and dozens of other groups speaking many different languages and practicing many different religions, all together under the Tsar's rule. For almost 300 years, Russia was ruled by the Romanov family monarchy. Tsar Nicholas II came to power in 1894 when he was only 26 years old. During Nicholas's reign, modern forms of communication were bringing ideas of democracy and freedom to the Russian people. Rebel groups were forming to oppose the Tsar's rule. The largest of the revolutionary groups was the Bolsheviks, which means majority in Russian. The Bolsheviks were influenced by Karl Marx, a German political philosopher who believed that workers should have more power because they are the ones that drive the economy. He also believed that private property should be abolished so society becomes more equal.
Marxists believed that the workers who were farmers and who worked in factories and did other kinds of things should be in control of the government, and the people who owned those things were simply exploiting them.
The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, was made up mostly of workers who considered themselves the leaders of the revolutionary working class of Russia.
Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains.
Workers had virtually no rights under the Tsar's rule. They were given little food, pay, or rest. The Bolsheviks' goal was to improve such working conditions. In 1905, a group of workers peacefully marched to the Tsar's palace, demanding better living conditions. The Tsar's guards reacted with violence, killing 130 protesters. Riots and protests around the country followed what was called the Bloody Sunday.
The Bolsheviks believed in human powers. They believed that people have the ability to bring something about if they only want it. They believed in what philosophers call voluntarism. You have the ability to really desire something badly through the strength of your mind, and then you can bring it about.
In 1914, World War I broke out, and Russia joined England and France to fight against Germany.
Russia is a very big country. It had a lot of problems mobilizing for war, so initially Russian soldiers did not have adequate weapons, adequate supplies, adequate food.
The country was losing the war. Millions of Russian soldiers were killed, and it was just horrible.
By 1917, the Russian people were running low on food, fuel, and shelter, and thousands of Russian soldiers were abandoning the army.
My grandfather, he did a very brave thing. Just ran away from the Russian army. If soldiers deserted the army, they could be shot immediately.
In March of 1917, riots broke out in major Russian cities. Factory workers, frustrated with inhumane working conditions, joined them and started attacking buildings and police stations. The Tsar ordered his army to control the rioters, but instead, the Tsar's soldiers joined the rebels. At this moment, Nicholas realized he no longer had any power and he had to give up his throne. A temporary provisional government was set up until there could be free elections. The Russian people wanted to get out of World War I, but the provisional government felt pressure from its allies, England and France, to keep fighting. Only one group posed a serious threat to the provisional government, and that was the Bolsheviks led by Lenin. Lenin promised that he would withdraw Russia from World War I and he would arm the workers. In October of 1917, the Bolsheviks quickly seized power and refused to cooperate with other socialist groups. Lenin went back on his promise of freedom of speech by shutting down newspapers that expressed opposing political views.
Lenin was not just a ruthless politician, but Lenin also distinguished between means and ends, and in the end he believed in the ends. How do you engage with a country that has this huge disparity, not only in income, but also in education and access to education? Do you give them basically all the say and say, well, let's put it to a democratic test? Or do you think, well, I actually know better than they, and I'm acting in their best interest?
There are no morals in politics. There's only expedience.
The Bolsheviks tried to put into effect a government that, over a short period of time, would actually, in the name of the people, own the land and own the factories and own the apartment buildings, everything. The other major countries of the world were afraid that that revolution would spread to their countries and it would ruin things for the people who controlled it, who were mainly owners of property, factories and land.
A civil war began between the Bolsheviks, known as the Reds, and the Whites, the anti-Bolshevik groups that had allied to remove Lenin from power.
It was just a butchery on both sides, but at the end of the day, the Bolsheviks were able to create slogans, symbols that embodied this bright future, whereas the Whites that they fought, they were actually seen as the has-been powers, as the supporters of the Tsar.
France and England and the United States actually sent troops into Russia to try to control events and perhaps bring the Tsar's government back.
The Civil War lasted until 1921, and the Bolsheviks won.
Some of the people who were leaders of the revolutionary Bolshevik government in Russia wanted to make revolution throughout the world, in every country.
Just an interesting parallel. The level of wealth inequality in Russia before the revolution was not as radical as it is in the United States today. Would you say in the US there's a revolutionary situation? We don't know, probably not. I mean, there's Occupy Wall Street.
A revolution is impossible without a revolutionary situation. Furthermore, not every revolutionary situation leads to revolution.
Today, as we know, people are expressing themselves in opposition to their governments in lots of countries where we never saw it happen, like in Libya and Tunisia and Syria. And those are major changes. We have to say, partly it has to do with the industrial and the technological revolutions that make people think that there are rights that their government should not prevent them from exercising.
In conclusion, the Russian Revolution lasted more than a decade and had a huge impact on global history. The ideas that started the Russian Revolution, that political power should be given to the workers and wealth should be shared equally, spread throughout the world and can be seen in modern political movements today.